All right, good morning, folks. This is Oscar with Houston in Action. I am the census organizer, and I am currently going to be covering, today we're going to talk about the census, the community responses and updates and trainings, and I'll be going more around scripts and phone banking later in the presentation. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and input. And one of our big hopes is that we can all collaborate out of this space. So it's not just a presentation, but a working format. But thank you everybody for coming into this morning. So welcome into the space. Before we get started, we want to review our working principles. These are working principles from Houston in Action that we have put together for all our meetings and our work. Our intention is to remind ourselves and ground ourselves on what we're working on. The working principle I want to cover today, and I want to make sure that we ground ourselves in, is an equity and systems level change, which means maintaining a focus on equity and achieving a systems level change. And by that, we mean that how do we ensure that our most vulnerable communities and our undercounted communities have access not only to our resources, but that are part of the decision making when we move forward. So this is a quick overview of what we have for the agenda for today. We will be covering the data and why it's important. We have both Civis and January advisors joining us today that will be able to support going through the process and covering the details about our data. We want to also introduce you all into how our community is going to respond, which we'll be talking about how we interact with the community as well. And then the Census Bureau, we have lovely Ana Redondo with the Census Bureau, who will also be telling us what is the big shift that happened last week in terms of how do we support the community. And then our best practices for a community organization. These are, unfortunately, our presenter for our partners actually fell a little ill, but we will be covering the best practices and things that we covered with them. So, and then we'll have next steps and planning so y'all can see what other trainings are available and how you can participate. So the first question we wanted to cover, to give it to civics and January advisors, and updates and responses. So let me see. So first, what we have, we want to hand it over to the response rates. I'm not sure this is can you hear me?
Hi, this is Iñaki Sagarsasu from Civis Analytics, a senior applied data scientist with Civis, and I've been in charge of the Civis part of the engagement with Harris County. I just wanted to talk briefly about sort of an overview of how response rates are happening in Harris County and the city of Houston, and brought some broad comparisons with other areas, and then I'll pass it along to January advisors. But just like to set the ground, response rates, which is what we'll be talking about, is just basically the number of households that have self-responded the census questionnaire over the total number of households that have been identified by the census. So the Census Bureau has spent years identifying all the households in the different areas of the country. And for this, they've engaged local governments, and that they've made this master list of addresses, which is what they're using as the basis for this whole operation. So when we say response rates, is just how many households have responded versus that total number that the Census Bureau thinks that exists in the country. Next slide, please. So just to give an update, as of April 26th, the US as a whole was responding at around 53%. In 2010, this was around 74%. So we're seeing about 20 points below those national numbers of 2010. The state of Texas is responding below the national response rate at 48%. And Harris County and Houston are both below Texas, with Harris County responding slightly at a higher rate than the city of Houston. Everybody is responding at a lower rates than they did in 2010, which is one of the reasons why this getting more responses, it's so important. When we break down Harris County into unincorporated areas and into areas that are incorporated, but besides the city of Houston, we see that the response rates are actually at higher rates, so 51% and 52%, closer to the national response rate. So we're seeing significant low response rates from the areas of Harris County in the city of Houston. Next. When we compare Harris County and the city of Houston to comparable size-wise areas, we see that where city of Houston is third in the top 5 cities in the country, sort of above Los Angeles and New York, but below Phoenix and Chicago. Whilst Harris County is out of the top 5 counties in the country, it's the one that it's reporting at a lower rate. Right. So, for instance, Los Angeles County includes many cities other than just the city of Los Angeles that have much higher response rates than the city of Los Angeles, bringing the county response rate higher. So, Harris County and the city of Houston are not doing that great when we compare nationally. Next. When we compare to areas within Texas, we also see a similar performance, right? Out of the top 5 cities in Texas, Houston is last. Out of the top counties in Texas and neighboring counties of Harris County, we're also towards the end of the tail. So our neighbors in Fort Bend, Montgomery, and Brazoria, for instance, have higher response rates than Harris County. This can a lot be explained by demographics and composition of this. And I believe David might touch up on a little bit of that in his talk. Next. So what does this mean? Well, if the county is reporting at a rate of 48%, so just barely below 50%, it means that there is, in areas that have a similar response rate, there's a lot of households that are still to be for counting, right? So just to give an example, in the number of households that have reported in these communities, reporting below 48.2% is about 300,000. That means in these areas, there's about close to 500,000 households still yet to report. So these seems to be the areas that provide a bigger opportunity to increase the number of households reporting and increase the county and the city self-response rate. Out of that 500,000, 300,000 or slightly above that belong to the city of Houston, while the other 100,000 belong to either incorporated areas or unincorporated Harris County. So one of the patterns that we've looked at is the behavior of these response rates over time. And what we knew this from 2010, and we're starting to see this pattern, is that the daily increase in response rates is decreasing, which means that every day there's less households responding to the census, right? It does vary, which means that there's opportunity for changing that, right? There are peaks that are that we see. One of them was around Census Day, which was April 1st, that saw an increase in response rates. We see another one right now. If you see the little graph on the chart, we see that around April 24th, we are seeing a little spike again. So there are different events and there are different activities that we can do to increase this response rates. Next. So what we see throughout is that hard to count areas are following similar bumps, even though smaller than non-hard to count areas. So the effects across the county are somewhat uniform, but so we need to find a way to get these hard to count areas to increase their response rates more than the non-hard to count areas, which is where there are less people pending to report or less households pending to report. One of those things is what Houston in Action and its partners have been doing, which is making phone calls and calling people. And we see that there's a significant effect that the more calls that are made to different areas that are not responding are having an effect. So in this chart, we're showing the change in the daily rate in the vertical axis and the number of calls made in the horizontal axis. And the one thing that I want to point out is that when we make more calls to different areas, the response rates seem to be increasing. However, there seems to be a saturation effect. So I think for planning purposes, it's good to keep this in mind. It seems that there's a point where more calls are not having the expected effect, and so we should keep in mind that to reallocate resources once we've reached that limit, so that we reallocate that to another area. But overall, I think we're seeing a positive increase when we look only at areas that have not been saturated. We see that the daily rate change increases by half. So there is some significant increase that we can be making in these areas. And there's a question, I don't know if that's for me.
It seems that the question is, are those calls where someone picked up or just a call in general?
I'd have to look back at the data. I believe these are calls where, I believe we're only getting calls where somebody picks up. But I'll look back at the data. There's more information in those calls that we can look into. But I think in general, the point that these calls seem to be making an effect, it's a positive finding. And I'll pass it along to David.
Thank you. And for those that are just joining, welcome everyone. We're happy to have you on board. This is Ana Magnolia, Census Coordinator for Houston in Action. I know Ayana asked if these slides are going to be available, and they are. You should have received an email this morning from Mario, and we will be using those documents that he sent to be part of this meeting. But as a follow-up, we will post them in the different Basecamp accounts that if you are a part of, great. If not, send us an email and we'll definitely include you. And thank you, Melissa. Good morning. Thank you for joining. So I'd like to ask David McClendon with January Advisors to walk us through his slides on the research that he's done on priority neighborhoods for census outreach.
Great. Thanks, Ana. So we wanted to, I wanted to, Iñaki has given a big broad overview and looking over time at some of the ways we're using data to understand the context for Harris County. I wanted to dig a little deeper into some of the priority neighborhoods that Houston in Action and its partners are looking into going forward and targeting outreach efforts. So if you could go to the next slide. So overall, this is the response rates by census tract within Harris County. And you'll also see we sort of group them. The gray lines are census tract boundaries. The dark black lines, which will become more apparent in the next slide, not quite yet, but will be are different neighborhoods that the Kinder Institute has defined for Harris County. Just to walk through the legend so we know what we're looking at. The yellow ones are those that are below 50% response rates. The darker the yellow, the fewer households have responded. Those in blue are those that are over 50%. And again, the darker the blue, the better the response rates are. So if you go to the next slide. So the priority areas we've been looking at are mainly in a couple different regions and clumps of neighborhoods. One in the Southwest region, in the Northwest, Greens Point, and Aldine, those just north of the city, as well as downtown. Over in Denver Harbor, North Shore, Cloverleaf area, as well as Pasadena and Edgebrook, and the east side of parts of the east side of Houston. In general, what we see is that some of a lot of the neighborhoods that we expected were going to have low response scores do have low response scores based on demographics. There are a few exceptions. One of those is African-American majority neighborhoods tend to be overperforming what we expected. And a lot of the neighborhoods that are underperforming in census tracts that are underperforming, but also just have low response rates in general, are those that have large numbers of Hispanic households, Spanish-speaking households, and households with non-citizens. So these are households we were already worried about not responding to the census. So just to give that broad overview of the demographics. But we're going to now, if you go to the next slide, dive a little deeper into some of the other neighborhoods, into the specific neighborhoods. So in the Southwest region, we're talking about Galveston, Westwood, Brayburn. I'm not going to dive into all of the details here, but I've made a slide for a number of these different regions to give you a sense so people can go back later and dive a little deeper. But this particular neighborhood, currently as of April 26th, has a 30% response rate. So 70% of households still haven't responded, and it's also has a large population of almost 80,000. And the race ethnicity is this is a neighborhood that 70% of residents are estimated to be Hispanic or Latinx. So if you go to the next slide. This is the Northwest region, which includes Northwest Houston neighborhood, Langwood, Fairbanks, and Northwest. If you go to the next. This is in the east side. A lot of the east side has low response rates. Currently, these three neighborhoods have some of the lowest. And again, our 94% of residents in these neighborhoods are Hispanic. If you go to the next slide. So the north side, North Line near North Side neighborhoods is another priority neighborhood and region. If you go to the next slide. These are ones that I have not really clustered into regions necessarily, but just wanted to point out. So downtown, Greenspoint, Aldine area, Pasadena and Edgebrook, Cloverleaf and East Harris, Denver Harbor and North Shore. Again, a lot of areas that have low response scores and also in many cases have large populations. So if we can go to the next slide. I wanted to give a quick tutorial so that you can dive into this on your own. We have a public-facing web application that'll load up right here, and I just wanted to walk through some of the ways that you can dive into this data on your own and also see some of the partners, potential partners that are available. So we'll just wait for this to load. It's a lot of data we've got going on in here. Great. So when it first loads, here you'll see the City of Houston. We've been trying to update it daily. It seems like the last time I uploaded it was on Friday, or uploaded new data was on Friday, but I'll make sure to upload that after this, the newest data. But you can start by, on the left-hand side, selecting a boundary. So there's a lot of different boundaries a lot of our partners want to see. Things like city council districts, super neighborhoods. Let's look on the kinder neighborhoods though, which encompass all of Harris County. And so if you scroll around on the map, you'll see highlighted different neighborhood regions that you can look and click on. But you can also, and you can zoom in as well. Let's click on Greenspoint, which, yeah, right there. So then you can really dive deeper into Greenspoint. Let's look on the left-hand side. You can do the view partners and resources down at the bottom, where you can choose one here. So you can look at childcare providers. Let's look at like grocery stores in the area, which I think should have at least one or two up there in our data set. You can also look at childcare providers, civic clubs. We also have apartment complexes, if you're doing outreach to them. We also have libraries and different places of worship. all sorts of different kinds of providers, some of which, like public schools, may not be available right now, but plenty of places to contact. And if you go over to the Partners and Resources tab over at the top, and of course, you can also download some of this data as well. But if you go to this page, you can also look for partners in this particular neighborhood you clicked on and filter by all of them and download that table and get more contact information as well as address information for those that we have. So I just wanted to give you a sense of what that resource is all about, and as well as give you the link that'll be on the slide deck where you can go and explore it yourself. So that's all I have for right now. So I'll turn it back over to you, Oscar.
Thank you, David. So folks are asking if this is open to everyone. I just want to remind that this search or this link is open for folks to utilize. And I think it would be helpful to also talk. I'm curious, when I saw this map the first time, I thought it was great that you were adding what we're calling community assets. So healthcare, clinics, Head Start, you also have apartment complexes. So I just want to confirm that this is also information that is available through this map, right?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you, David. I wanted to pause here and see if you all have any questions that you want to put in the chat. Thank you, everyone, again for joining us. This is Anna McNaught, Census Coordinator with Houston in Action. I am grateful for your time today. We have 106 participants on the call. So we do want to make sure that questions are answered and that we have, since we have the experts here on this call. So Pastor Eckert, yes, this link can be emailed, and since you will be part of the Community Health Subcommittee on our Basecamp account, you will also have access to all the notes and the presentations that we post in there. So thank you, and if I can have we're happy to have you join, as I mentioned, and thank you to Civis and January advisors for the important data that you shared. This data has informed our campaign since Houston in Action decided to prioritize the 2020 census back in 2018. And so for everyone joining us today, we want to make sure that you're also informed and equipped to use the data to inform how you are conducting census outreach in the region. And we also want to make sure that you have the capacity to create plans based on all of the community assets that are available in your neighborhood that you may or may not know of. And so next slide, please, Oscar.
Sorry, we have another question. It says if maybe we can talk about why we believe reasons people are not responding to the low response area so far. And for those of you who also can check the chat portion, remember at the bottom of your screen, it should be a chat option, which would be orange or green, depending on how the chats are coming in. The link to the map is already in there, so feel free to open that up as well. But I don't know if David or someone from Civis, or if you want to give context of why you think people, the reason people are not responding in those areas.
So we know some of the reasons in terms of demographics, what makes certain areas have lower response scores. Some of those line up with what we're already seeing. So we know that renters, for instance, are the percentage of renters in a given census tract is one of the strongest predictors of a low response, and that's in part because people are moving around a lot more. And right now, also, there's a lot of people potentially losing jobs and not focused on the census. So and that's probably going to be harder in places with a lot of renters and people who are highly more mobile. One of the other factors, as I mentioned earlier, was that these are also areas with large Hispanic and non-citizen populations who, given the current political context over the past year around this and the politicization of the census, even though that there is not a citizenship question on the census, I think a lot of people are scared or apprehensive about it. or who honestly, this may be the first time, if they're new to this country, this is the first time they've ever experienced the census, and so may not know about it or understand it, or feel safe responding. So those are just some of the factors that are likely going into why certain areas have lower response scores than others.
Thank you so much, David. I think there also is a question to see if we had any info on Brazoria County as well.
So on the map, you can see all the response rates. It's designed for Harris County and the city of Houston primarily. But if you zoom out to different boundaries at that top left, that first select we did where we select the kinder neighborhoods, if you zoom out to look at things like congressional boundaries, they do include some of the other counties, census tracts in other counties around, including Brazoria, Montgomery, and Galveston counties. But a lot of the community assets we collected primarily just for Harris County and the city of Houston.
Thank you, David. And I think the same thing could go for like Galveston if they wanted to check out other counties as well, right? We also had
exactly.
Yeah, we had another question also about where the source for this information came from.
It's a lot of different sources of information. I mean, the response rates come from the census, publishes them daily at 3 p.m. You can actually go on their website and check that out as well. A lot of the other information comes from the city and county data sources, data on churches we've pulled from IRS filings. So some of that is could be a little incomplete or a little old, depending on if the place of worship is still around or not. But we've tried to be as comprehensive as we could to get all those partners up there. We also don't have everybody's contact information on there, but we've also put things like the Houston Food Bank sites on there that are currently doing outreach during COVID that we know are active.
Yeah, so there's still a lot of information that we still want to upload into it, right? So it is a work in progress, but it's a really, really amazing tool. Thank you so much, David. And I think that folks also had questions in terms of like how Civis gets the information too. And maybe we can give some more context to that. And for those who are looking for what David mentioned about the response rates who are coming into the census, please check the chat options. Remember that the chat will show up on your screen at the bottom, or whether it's going to be in green or in orange, depending on your screen. And then you'll be able to click to the link where the census response rates are coming in from the Bureau. But we'll continue with the presentation. Please, if anyone has any questions or comments, one or two things, feel free to write them in the chat portion and we'll review them. If we didn't get to your question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question so that way we don't miss any content or information. The whole intention of this process is to be able to support our communities, for y'all to get the resources needed, and for us to be able to give you the most up-to-date information so we can strategize and move forward and ensure that we can have a complete count. Actually, there's another question from Francis. Does anyone know if District K has a recorded PSA or engaged in any census outreach team in their offices? I think we can talk about that. We can talk about how we coordinate that in a bit right now. It's Anna McNaugh can take it over from here for this portion, and we can talk about how we might be able to collect some of those resources and give that in.
I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
How soon can we pick up data as far as flyers and promotion items? We want to do a appointment blitz, but we need some materials. How soon can we pick those up?
Thank you, Pastor Decker. And we will want to get on a coordination call with you all to make sure that we have all of the resources that you need, and we'll cover that actually briefly. So you're right on time. If I can have the other slide. So as Civis and general advisors mentioned, it is so important to look at data when we're also reviewing response rates. It was really incredible to see the increase by 10% of response rates during Census Week, when we know that a lot of your organizations were doing phone banking, texting, social media events. And so with that in mind, we want to make sure that we continue in a way that makes sense to the campaign and to completing making sure that communities are completing their census. For some context, and for those that may be new to these spaces, we're currently in a phase of the census campaign where we have provided census awareness and education. Whether you and your organization have been trained to talk to community members about the census, confidentiality, how easy, fast, and secure it is, we have been able to inform lots of communities across the region, and we're also been connecting to the Census Bureau to make sure that we are up to date with the timeline and the responses. And so we've also been able to have provide you with some resources and trainings around census education, both from local organizations as well as national resources. And so this is the current phase of our campaign. And next slide, please. And while it's important to continue to inform folks, we also want to make sure that we are using the data to increase response rates in specific regions. So our approach in this new phase of our census campaign is to focus on completion for 10 regions. And what that means is that based on the data, we'd like to coordinate with you all, the leaders of your respective organizations and groups, for specific weeks to focus in 10 regions as presented by January advisors. The other part is that based on the training that we're going to hear from the Census Bureau is what we'd like to invite you to identify census ambassadors that will support with the completion of the form via phone banking, the members of your organizations or folks that need support in completing the form in this way. And then of course, we'd like to plan with the partners to activate your networks to, again, text or phone bank, provide census flyers in food distribution or in mask distributions, have leaders commit to calling the neighbors, asking principals to call parents, and request state leaders to add census message from their sermons, and also ask health clinics to add census message. This is not all. We understand that there's a lot more to it. There's management districts, there's community centers. So we're really looking forward to working with you to continue the work in each region, and then again, use the data to ensure that we're our work is being effective in those regions. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So at this point, we're actually going to present a poll to you all that Mario will share. These are the regions that we want to focus on for the next couple of weeks to come until the second week of July, approximately. The idea is that while we are working in the entire region, there are specific resources that are provided to these specific regions in a time span of a week. So we identified at Southwest having low response rates, and so we really like to start our work in Southwest, as some of you may know. But what we'd like to also share is that we'd like to create this poll where we get a sense from you all, participants in this call, where we should also be focusing our efforts based on where you are working on. Is that right, Oscar?
Yes, so we're going to ask a poll right now, and the way I want you to think about it is, where are you currently working? And based on where we get the most responses, we will figure out how we prioritize the order in which we're reaching out into these areas. So your efforts right now are going to have direct input. So I'm launching a poll right now that folks should be able to see, that it says, what neighborhoods are you currently working in? It's a multiple choice one, so please feel free to check more than one as you're going through the process. And by more than one, I mean check all the neighborhoods that you are currently working in. This way we can, as we plan how we move forward, it's going to be based on your response. The reason, Civis and January Advisor presented already, is that we want to be able to cover the areas that have the most, the highest number of low response rates. What that I mean is that we have the most people who are not responding. And because although all of you are working within our communities, we know that we can get this done. So I'm gonna give it a few more seconds. Do y'all see the poll? Yes. Please take a couple of seconds, fill it out. Click on them and submit it. I think we gave folks a good time to respond. We'll give it about 5 more seconds for those of you who are still thinking and read it in, and then we'll see what the results of the poll look like.
Oh, Scott, everyone loves your music.
Were people able to answer the poll? Were people able to submit it? Okay. I'm having issues recording the responses on here right now. So I'm gonna try this one more time to make sure that y'all can actually visible. Sorry, because it currently shows that I didn't get any responses. Were folks able to answer the poll? Yes? Okay.
Yeah, it's showing up on our screens with the response.
Okay, cool. So we're gonna view these responses after this to see what the list looks like. I actually, in my end, I can't see what the responses. Do y'all see what are the highest responses that we've gotten?
Southwest.
Yeah, Southwest. And east side.
Okay, we'll be pulling this out from the back end to show. Oh, thank you so much. To show what we're working at. It does show that Southwest, East Side was the second one, 34, then Pasadena, Cloverleaf, Denver Harbor. Well, actually, Southwest and North Side were pretty high at 45 in Southwest, East Side at 37, and then North Side at 31%. Wow, this is actually very, very informative. So I appreciate everyone for participating. We're gonna go over next steps, and Anna's gonna cover some things of how we're gonna follow with this. We have a process where we're gonna follow up with people, which includes how to access both the collateral and then the resources that HIA can provide to support you with the proper tools to get you informed. So I'll send it right back to Anna.
Thank you. And there were a lot of comments while we were doing the poll. What I would like to emphasize, there were questions about other counties. I want to say that Houston in Action has been focused on Harris County and the city of Houston. I know that there were questions around Galveston. I don't know if the folks from United Way Galveston are on the call. Lindsay or Keith, but it'd be very helpful if there are new folks here that want to join those efforts. If you can please connect on the chat. And so I think that we want to make accessible resources for everyone, no matter where you work. And so, but the focus for us is, again, Harris County, unincorporated Harris County, and the city of Houston. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So how to join. So Mario is going to send right now, and this is also part of the email that we shared with you earlier today. If you didn't get it, you'll get the link today. We have created regional coordination forms with those regions that you just submitted a poll for, so that we can get a sense of what is your interest, what are the list of activities that you may have already going on, what networks do you have access to, and what are your needs. So to Pastor Deckard's point about the collateral, if there's collateral that you also need, we want to make sure that we know what's going on in from your organization or group's perspective. I know that there was a question, David, about from Melanie about getting zip codes for those areas as well. I know folks also work in zip codes. I know from the Houston Food Bank perspective, that will, to Melanie's question here, is that will help us narrow down the partner list. Is that available in the map that you all provide, David, from General Advisors?
It's not available right now, but I can make it available or send that over. I can definitely send it over to Melanie. We can just share it with the whole group as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. So these forms are, if they haven't, so Mario has just shared this link in the chat, and we will send it again after the call, but please fill it out to the best of your abilities and to make sure that we have a concrete understanding of what you're able to do for that week of focus in the specific region that you work or are part of. And then we're also asking for you to join coordination calls. The idea is that once we identify core partners for each region, that we're able to have a coordination call to go very deep into, you know, based on what you said, who's going to call the principals, who's going to have flyers, where are the food distributions that are happening, and who's going to activate other leaders in those regions. And the other part is that we are going to schedule a regional coordinations call based on your activity, based on your areas of focus. And they're going to happen on Tuesdays from 3:30 to 4:30. So based on the poll that you just gave us, we're going to take that back and then basically create the schedule for each of the regions that we will continue to focus on. And we'll send you an invite to join that coordination call. And then definitely we know that there's a lot of great leaders in this call, but we know that there's more. So if there's any organization, group, people that that you think that they must participate because they know so many people and they're able to reach out to others about the census and why it matters, please invite them to those coordination calls to participate and to fill out the Google, these regional coordination forms. And so again, think about what you need. We want to invite you to think about, do you need collateral? Do we need to ask for, do you need some of these yes to the census yellow shirts? Do you need access to a phone banking system? Any graphics and toolkits for how we can coordinate to the best of our abilities?
Yeah, and I saw Hannah raise her hand. I'm not sure if you want to unmute yourself, Hannah, and ask the question.
Oh, I didn't feel the poll. That's what I didn't feel the poll of it before you took it out.
The poll?
Yeah, I didn't get to submit.
It's okay, Hannah. So actually the next portion, which we're going to cover, which Anna's going to get into more details. So we shared this link already on the on our chat portion if you want to review it there. And I'm going to take us to the link that which we're sharing. This is for us that helps us prioritize where people are. I already see a lot of anonymous friendly creatures there. So that way, if you pick either one of these, based on the areas that you're currently working in, you will be able to submit a form so we can follow up with you. So if it's been a specific area, you just click, let's say Pasadena is where you're currently working. You click on the form. And if we ask folks to please fill out this form, it has a few questions, but this is really going to help us coordinate how we're working together. So if you didn't get a chance to fill out the poll, please go to the form. Again, I shared it on our chat portion, and we'll be able to go through there. I'm also seeing that we're getting a lot of questions from people in different counties. And what we want to make sure that we highlight is that we want to support the efforts that we're doing, whether it be that you can see some of the resources that we created, and maybe you can support your the work that you're doing in your county. We've done trainings for phone banking and outreach that might be able to support like ways and you can do it on your own. We can talk even about later on if some of the collaterals that we have might be able to support your efforts. But most of the the tools that are made, including PowerPoints like these and the recordings of the trainings and some digital materials for census outreach is already online, which is accessible to all of you. So we'll make sure to add all of this information and more in our follow-up email after this call that will include this script, this PowerPoint as well. So if you didn't get a chance to answer the poll, please make sure to go to the link and fill out one of those forms today so we can see where you're working and how, and then we'll follow up with you to schedule a call and make sure we include everybody in those calls.
Thank you, Oscar. And so next slide, please. So now we'd like to thank Ana Redondo with the U.S. Census Bureau for joining us today. She will be covering Census Bureau guidelines on phone banking, as well as some updates for folks that are new. We also want to make sure that you are all aware of specific guidelines, and also as a reminder for folks that may have already participated in these calls, we want to also again highlight some of the specific resources that are available through the Census Bureau, as well as some of the timelines that have been shared with us. So Ana, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. My name is Ana Redondo. I am a partnership specialist with the U.S. Census Bureau. And today I'm going to really talk a little bit about some of the guidelines that I've been told, or I've been, some regional leadership has shared with us through our own planning phone calls that we have throughout the week. So in addition to that, at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about some updates. Everything is changing on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, so I want to make sure that you are updated with the latest information that we have. Next. Okay, go ahead. So as we continue this conversation, we know that a lot of organizations, a lot of families are struggling with this pandemic, and unemployment issues, healthcare issues, all kinds. So the focus has shifted away from the census. The media covers a lot of what's going on with the pandemic. So of course, we need to make sure that we continue to motivate individuals to participate in the 2020 census. That, and as well as other things that I'll talk about throughout the presentation, are affecting how we're seeing the change in response rates, the slowdown in response rates. So before you do any phone banking, you want to make sure that you understand that this is a voluntary engagement option. You don't have to do it. If you want to do it, you can do that. But there are certain things that you must follow. And so you want to make sure that you think about, what do I need to do in order for me to be successful with my phone banking? And then the last two bullets that you see here is tracking your work. I think it's very important anytime that you try to do an initiative with the community is to track to see how successful you are, how many calls you placed, how many people you helped, how many people you were able to reach and actually help directly with their census. And because the census is not something that is done in this manner, we all are aware that the census will send out mail outs, that you yourself can go online. You can call us directly as a Census Bureau and provide your answers, or you can fill out your form, or the last phase is actually waiting for an enumerator to come out to the community. So this is something new. Perhaps the community is not expecting this. So you want to make sure that you are annotating some of these reactions from the community, so that maybe we need to tailor our approach. Next, please. After you maybe set up an initial time that you want to set up a phone bank to actively help people with their census, maybe you want to do a follow-up session or call to think about what worked, what didn't work, what else do you need, or what you need to adjust. And so one of the things that I wanted to mention about response rates is that we too, the Census Bureau, has also been affected by the COVID-19. We have to abide by social distancing in the workplace. Field employees like myself, we're all working from home. The paper processing centers, the calling centers, they too have been affected. So there is a backlog of cases or calls placed into the call centers. And so our local staff is trying to alleviate that. So we are getting callback information so that locally our staff can call directly based on the language need, and other factors. And so if you need us to follow up with members of the community that do not want to provide the answers to you, the local Census Bureau staff is able to also support you in this. But because we don't normally dial out, we would need for that person's authorization for you to share that information with us. And it's as simple as, yes, please put me on a roster or on a listing so someone from the Census Bureau can call me back. So the basic information you see here would be necessary: the names, the phone numbers, best time to call, and if there is a language need or requirement. Next. One of the things that I would recommend is for you to make your community aware that you're going to be doing this. So you want to give them a heads up. And so in giving them a heads up, you can do two things. Number one, tell them where to go and, kind of pose as a reminder. We will be calling the community to check on the status of your census participation. You can do so online, by phone, by mail. And so hopefully that will kind of incentivize people to go ahead and do it. And then that way it also limits and hopefully reserves the resources and the time for those individuals that really need that assistance in filling out their census form. You also may want to prepare them what information is needed, right? And so you can see here what I find are the more difficult things to answer, specifically if there are people that are unrelated living in one particular housing unit. You want to make sure that you capture these 4 things. Next. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually walk through some of this information. You want to make sure that you are preparing your volunteers. Please know that they don't have to be census experts. They just need to have some materials, some kind of tools or resources nearby so that they know how to answer the questions. When we fully answer a question, we inspire confidence in another human being, right? They know, okay, this person knows what they're talking about, and I trust that they're going to be taking my information and entering it for me. One of the things, because of the pandemic, we may be needing some COVID-19 resource sheets for your volunteers, because there may be questions regarding needs that the family or the housing unit may have. Next. So this is really what has been provided to me on verbally. Over the phone, we had a regional call. And so our leadership is saying that there are some things that you can do proactively, but you do have to identify yourself. So the volunteers should say what their name is and who they're actually representing. They also need to make it clear at a specific point in the conversation, if the person agrees to participate, that they are not a census sworn employee. Why is that important? Because legally, the volunteer is not subject to the confidentiality standards that is afforded by the law. So they don't have to keep the information confidential, which kind of raises the issue on the respondent as to why should I participate with you, right? So we need to make that respondent aware of the difference between taking their information as a volunteer compared to what the Census Bureau would be able to do. Now, the second part of it is very simple. It is pretty much asking and following the questionnaire. You have to ask the questions verbatim, so just read them. Read the multiple choices. If somebody gets, stuck on how to answer a question, just saying, you know what, let me read it again, and then clarify to them. So you don't want anybody, you don't want your volunteers leading one person to answer one way, and you definitely don't want to be skipping any of the questions or answering the questions on behalf of the person without their knowledge. And remember, if somebody gets stuck, census, there is no right, there is no wrong. It is about how the person identifies. The last thing is making sure that you provide them some kind of confirmation that their information has been submitted for their household. So you either take a screenshot of the picture, the confirmation number, or you ask them to write down the number, the series of numbers, and also the date. You may also at this point want to track. So if you're working off a listing, you may want to also check to say how many people did you actually help through the filling out their census through your efforts. One of the things that we're noticing is that with all this assistance that is being provided to the communities, there is a confusion between what the census is about. So we want to make sure that your volunteers can differentiate and they can set the correct census expectations. So the census is about data, gathering data that other individuals, other agencies will be utilizing for the next 10 years. There is no direct benefit from the Census Bureau to an individual like we're seeing right now. So the economic stimulus package, the checks that people are receiving, we have nothing to do with that. We're about collecting information data publishing so that people can make choices and informed decisions at a later point. We're still in the phase of data gathering. So these numbers, these statistics, they're not going to be available until next year. So make sure also that you are prepared to sell it to someone who may not be a citizen, who may not be here, who may be part of the undocumented community. The census does help everyone. And so you need to be aware of what are some of the programs that some of these individuals may be able to access that benefit them and their family. And then there's additional information as to how the census benefits us in the long run. Next, please. So when we're talking about the money, the federal funding that supports all these hundreds of programs that we utilize, these are just some of the samples. These are sample programs that we, perhaps use on a daily basis, depending on the family, depending on the household. And so I've taken out the amount billions just because depending on what source of information you're reading, that amount can change. So we're just going to say billions of dollars are distributed. But I'm going to pause right here and just ask people, where does this money come from? Does anyone know? Okay, so I'm not sure if anybody is aware where this money comes from. But the money is
my taxes. I had was a response. It came in.
Okay. Yes, the money actually, some of it comes from us. So if we file a federal income tax, the federal income tax goes to the national office, to the federal government. And so not only us, but our local businesses pay income tax. Our local businesses also pay employment taxes that go to the federal purse, as I may call it. So out of that federal purse, that money is distributed, invested back into our communities through these programs. So we want to make sure that these people understand that by filling out the census, they're actually allowing or participating in those federal funds to come back and work for our community. So we want to make sure that they know this is something important that they should know about. Next, please. So here's just a recap of what the Title 13 and Title 44 is about. These are the two laws that actually have something to do with the census. Title 13 authorizes us at the Census Bureau to collect the information. It tells us that we can only publish statistics. And here I've underlined the fact that the Census Bureau staff is the one that is bound by the law to maintain confidentiality. But let's talk about what happens should you, as a volunteer, gather that information and enter into our system. Well, the information, once it's in our system, it's still going to have to the data still has to abide by the legal burden, which is to provide only statistical format. So we can't identify any one person or any one household. We can't share that data once it's in our system with any other government agency. So it's also clear for the volunteer to say that the information is still confidential once it's in our system. And then, the selling point is, what are your plans in 72 years? What do you have to lose in 72 years? Where are you going to be? Because in 2092 is when the physical response, how a housing unit responds to the census will be made available to the public. So it's a whole lifetime. There's really nothing to fear.
Anna, there's also a question that came in from Francisco that says, is there or is there not a way to purge phone list of households or people that have already submitted their 2020 census questionnaire? I assume not, based on the 72-year rule.
Right. So at this point, that information is not available. And even at that, because of the 72-year rule and the government records being confidential, we would not be able to share that information at this point.
Yeah, Oscar, I think that Francis was also sharing that if for the purposes of the regional coordination, we can definitely continue to share data at the block group level, and also which zip codes and neighborhoods those are with what Civis and January Advisors has provided us. And I also want to highlight that January Advisors will provide weekly reports that we will share with you in the multiple Basecamp accounts that we are part of, but also in newsletters and our website, so that you all can see response rates with those reports. And those, again, will be shared by January Advisors on a weekly basis to us. Thank you.
Yes, and just to make sure, if you have those questions, we do have, before this presentation is over, we have another portion for us to review who's been filling out the lists and see how we can support you. And for those who want to be able to reach out to the community and to be able to reach out into Harris County, we can help you get phone numbers and contacts if you don't have those, but we'll say that towards the end after Anna presents to the Bureau. So take it away, Anna.
Okay, so the other thing that volunteers should be aware of is the census residency rules. And what that means is that, who do we count and where do we count? So the rule of thumb is really count yourself where you would have been living on a permanent basis as of April the 1st. And so that April the 1st is our National Census Day. It's a snapshot. It's like taking roll call on April 1st. Are you here or are you not here? And so as we get away from April 1st, we have to keep that date in mind because babies are born, have been born. And so we want to make sure that we only count people that are living among us as of April 1st or before April 1st. And so even with this temporary COVID living situations, always remember to count yourself where you would have been permanently living had this pandemic not happened, because that is where the resources will be allocated.
Yeah, and there was a question actually about this too, Anna, about whether or not we'll have an understanding of how COVID impacted the census. That afterwards. Do you know, Ana Redondo, do you know if there will be we'll be able to show the impact that COVID had in the response to the census?
So one of the updates that I was going to share is that the Census Bureau will be conducting sort of like an emergency a survey. It's called a household pulse survey, and this particular survey is going to be launching pretty soon. It's over a 12-week period, and it gives us, as to better inform governments as to how to allocate resources. The purpose of this new survey will be to gauge how the communities have been impacted, households have been impacted economically and socially by this pandemic. So it's going to be the 2020 census going on, and also this household pulse survey, which is a very small sample. About 14 million households nationwide will be receiving an invitation. Another of the resources for your volunteers is to just have this handy, know how to go ahead and fill out the form. And then the last day is October 31st. I would use caution in advertising this day. We definitely want to create a sense of urgency that they should complete it now rather than later. The reason why we want to increase our response rates is because that minimizes the follow-up, right? So if right now we're unable to work in the communities, we delay additional time in getting all these census responses, then it makes our job a little bit more complicated in going door to door. We don't know how people will be responding. Hopefully, things do clear up. And so, we don't know what challenges we may be facing as an agency once we are out and about in the community. So definitely encourage them to do it today. Do it today, with you whenever that day is when you're calling them on the phone. So please create that sense of urgency.
Thank you, Anna. There's another question that came up. I just want to make sure to bring it up. They wanted to know if the COVID survey, if you all think that might cause confusion, or maybe there's more of a concern that the COVID survey might cause confusion from that in the census, and maybe you can give more context on that.
Right. So I know that I rolled this. I provided some of my partners this information last Thursday. I'm asking them in whatever communication methods they have that they separate this. This is not the 2020 census. This is something different that will allow federal agencies, state governmental officials to decide where to allocate additional resources that may be coming down from the federal level. So yes, it is easy to confuse. I know there was confusion between the ACS, the American Community Survey, and the 2020 census ongoing at the same time. But just to give you some idea, the Census Bureau conducts about 130 different surveys every year. So so there's different topics that these surveys covers. And so we just want to make sure that we let that community know what this is about. Again, this is a very, very small sample. It's about 14 million housing units nationwide, where compared to now, we've been counting in Texas, I think the number is 5.9 million households in just Texas alone. So it's a very, very small percentage of housing units that will be receiving this survey.
Thank you, Anna. And that's also a call to all of you who now know that the survey is coming out. It's how we help the community navigate that. So I think that also responsibility, it's a shared responsibility that we have as organizers and as people and nonprofits who work in the community to be able to uplift and help people uplift it and help people differentiate the two. Oops.
So one of the ways that maybe you can overcome someone who may be a little reluctant in giving you some information if you come to that point is just telling them what the census will not ask you. And so here you see what we won't ask. Next. It's also important to remember that there is no citizenship question on the 2020 census, and they should also be familiar somewhat as to what questions are asked and why they're asked, if the case will come. Again, they don't have to know everything, but they just have to have some resources that they can refer back to. So you see here some of the sample, some of the first 3 questions that you see on the survey, very straightforward. Next, please. Then we need a phone number. Why we need a phone number is in the event that there is a need to call back and follow up on the housing unit, that establishes some communication method. For question number 5, we need the first person to be the central point of the household. So whether that's the head of household, the person who pays the rent, person who pays the mortgage, because that establishes then the relationship starting with person number 2 and onwards. With sex, it is limited to 2 choices. And so we want to make sure that we encourage everyone to self-identify and identify an answer that they most closely lean towards. Again, everything in the census is about auto self-identification. So whatever applies to the person the most, that is the answer that we are seeking. Age and date of birth, they're important because there are programs that are designed specifically for certain age groups. And so also it brings down the question to the baby. So if the baby was born after April 1st, then that baby would not be counted. We don't want to be insensitive. We don't want to say that babies, we don't love our babies and our babies don't count. But at the same time, that is a reference date. And so we have to abide by that reference day. And the reason why we're asking for the age also as a verifier is to make sure that you've entered the correct information. And babies, infants, we would assign a 0 age. We don't measure it in months. Now, I'm going to spend a little time on Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin just because it confuses people of our community. We are using OMB standards, Office of Management and Budget. So all federal agencies are standardized by Office of Management and Budget. And so we have to publish data as, say for instance, the race white, Hispanic or Latino, or white, not Hispanic or Latino. That is how we need to publish the data. So for those individuals that have a hard time understanding what is it that we're trying to get at in terms of this question, we want to make sure that they understand that this is about your heritage. If they've been here a few generations, then maybe you need to think about where was your ancestor prior, if they know, prior to coming to the U.S. So here you see you can have multiple categories. That is possible. Next. And this to bring it down to the race question, not just the Hispanic population, there are other populations that sometimes struggle with this question. Just know that, they can answer multiple categories, they can write it in. And I've put in here a few examples for the Hispanic community as to how this could apply. Someone could be Hispanic, say yes to that question. Guatemalan origin, and they may identify with American Indian, with the Mayan. So you can actually write in your racial identity. And so again, we're asking 2 different questions, and these 2 are very easily confused by certain groups. Here's just something that I borrowed from OMB, Office of Management and Budget. These are the categories of races that they've established since 1997, and so that is what we're working with. For American Indian or Alaska Native, it does also include, indigenous groups from North, South, and Central America as well. The last two questions, basic information, and these two are asked of anyone who, after starting with person number 2. So they're just very basic questions, and, just read the categories and the multiple choices. The last thing I'll say is that Census has expanded indefinitely the application period. So this may be a question that may come up when you're, talking to members of the community. If they're interested in filing, in applying for a census job, they are able to do so. You see the website, you see starting salaries on here, the types of jobs that we are trying to recruit for. Basic requirements, and nothing has changed. What has changed is this environment that we're living in. We have no idea what some of these applicants that have already been in the applicant pool, we don't know if they're going to be interested in working for the census anymore. We don't know if they feel safe in being out in the community. So we want to make sure that we extend the period so that we have the best candidate pool possible, so that we're able to get the complete count that we're seeking for every single county in the area in which we work. Here's my contact information. Are there any questions at this point? There was a question about how do you answer for adopted children. So for adopted children, it's the same. You can, if they're living with you as of April 1st, 2020, on a permanent basis, you would count them in your home. In the person number 2 and onwards, you can designate whether that person is your biological son or daughter, or the person is adopted.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. We also have another question if the U.S. Census is still hiring folks, and if they're hiring non-citizens as well.
Yes, so we are still hiring because right now we're on hold. Our marching order, as I call it, is for us to be ready to head out and start resuming operations for field operations, which is working in the local community on June 1st. So as of June 1st, we will be resuming hiring. We will be resuming training. We will be resuming everything else that needs to happen in order for us to continue the phases of the counting people. So yes, the second question was residents can be hired. Yes. So the minimum requirements are to be 18 years of age. They have to be U.S. citizens or have a valid social security number and authorization to work. So if you meet those criteria, you are more than welcome to apply for a census job, and they must pass a background check.
Thank you, Anna. And another question came in about the timeline, the updated timeline. We know that it was initially by the end of June, and then it was moved to August 14th. But since you mentioned August 31st, can you update that, see if that's accurate?
Yes. So there was clarification within the Census Bureau. Initially, they had told us that August 14th was the deadline, and then they had proposed to extend it to October 31st, and that date had implications because our budget, our fiscal year ends on September 30th. So it had budgetary implications as well as legal implications. The law requires the Census Bureau to deliver the count to the Office of the President. And these are statistics, these are big numbers, to the Office of the President by December 31st. That is the legal mandate. So because we were expanding the time frame, there's also a congressional approval needs to happen in order for us to go past December 31st, right? So they clarified for us that the October 31st deadline for capturing data does not need congressional approval. Therefore, we can use that date as the official end date for the census.
Thank you so much, Anna, for your input. And to your point earlier, when we're reaching out to the community, we want to tell them that it's available and they should answer it now. Saying that it's fine till October 31st might not create the sense of need or urgency for people to fill it out. So as a tactic to make sure that people fill it out, we want to be able to encourage them as much as we can.
If I may add one more thing, we are, to create that sense of urgency, we are having a digital census call to action weekend, which starts this weekend on May 1st through the 3rd. And so I've provided some additional resources to Basecamp. Hopefully you can find those resources, but we want digital presence about the census. So if you're able to help with a post with a very short video, there's scripts there for 10, 15, 30 seconds from your organization, please consider doing something like that to bring awareness about the 2020 census.
And we'll also add the information on our website too, so people can have access to it. So you can find it on the Bureau's website as well as Houston in Action. I think Anna McNaught also had another question.
Yes, Anna, I think for the organizations that are new to this space, if you can share briefly about the different service or rather partnership specialists that are available and how they can connect to the organizations that are on this call.
So there are approximately 30 different partnership specialists that work in our greater, or well, less than 30 in our greater Houston area, because we have some in Southeast Texas. We cover Southeast Texas as well, Beaumont, Port Arthur, that area over there. And we all work based on communities. So we all have a tract, we call it a tract. And so mine is Hispanic. So I work a lot with the Hispanic community. There's a second language requirement to work with specific communities. So I also work with faith-based groups that are primarily Hispanic. So just depending on your need, if you haven't connected with someone that serves directly your community, there's someone for the Chinese community, somebody from the Vietnamese community. There's another person that serves the Muslim and Arabic community. So if you, what I can do is maybe provide a listing to Basecamp, and then from there you can go and see. But if you are working with someone already, keep in touch with that person. They can update you as to what is going on with the census, or provide you additional materials or guide you to where you can find more information about the 2020 census and some of the initiatives that we currently have.
Thank you so much, Anna. And I also want to take a moment to give a shout out to Genesis from Naleo, who's also putting a lot of resources in the comments. So please read the comments for those of you who might be new to Zoom. Remember that the comment section will be highlighted in the bottom of your screen. It's either going to be green or orange, and you'll be able to read some of the questions there. So please feel free to read what we've been sharing there. I have another question actually. It says, how does the census average US and or Texas current 2020 response rate compared to the similar to the frame to the 2010? So basically, how do we compare 2020 data to 2010 data?
So the 2020 census was slightly different. The questionnaire looked different. The data, we didn't do it online. So even at that, we may right now be at a different level had the online version not be available, especially during this pandemic. But just to let you know, Harris County in 2010, the final response rate was 72%. And we're currently at 48.4 for Harris County as of the 26th. So even at that, our ceiling to beat, our goal to beat is 72%. We're about 30 points away from, less than 30 points away from that. So even the data collection methods that we used in 2010 were different from what we're using now. And so had we not had the online version, I mean, I think we probably would be looking at a major setback in terms of a response rate. So, don't feel discouraged as to where we are. Look at it as an opportunity to continue to serve our communities, continue to do more for our communities, because we know that it's times like this that we need to make sure those numbers are correct so that those resources can funnel back to our local community. So thank you. Thank you for all that you do. We all have to deal with so many priorities. Our families have been impacted individually, but you all continue to do the good work in ensuring that everybody's counted. So thank you so much for your efforts.
Yes, thank you so much, Anna. Folks, feel free to also chat her. You could do it publicly or privately within the chat box for questions that you have. And yes, it is our role as organizers, community leaders, and in the different nonprofits and as individuals that we serve, that we can support the community. So as you move forward, one thing I do want to highlight is that the population, even within the city, has drastically changed from 2010 to now. So that means there's a lot more people living in the city. As we mentioned during previously, we spiked the number of responses during Census Week, which is the first week of April, which went really, really high. So we know that we're collaborating our efforts can make the impact and the change that we want to move forward. So one of the things that, just as a quick recap, also for folks who might be joining us right now, we covered, thanks to the help of Civis and January advisors, we covered a lot where we are currently with the data in the very beginning of the process. After that, through that data, we saw the priority areas, which we covered 10 priority areas that have some of the highest numbers of people who are not responding. So we want to focus on these areas specifically and for us to move forward. We put a poll out together with the guidance of all of you here today. We'll be able to prioritize Gulfton as the first place, then moving into the second and third based on those responses. From there, what Anna mentioned today is that even though, as we know, COVID has impacted all our lives, it also has impacted the way the census is working, which means that a lot of the census officers either at capacity and they will not be doing numerators right now, going door to door to asking about the census. But also calling in the census has presented a different challenge because a lot of people are trying to call into the Bureau, but they won't be able to talk to somebody maybe in a period of time. So we want to make sure that we can refer people to the Bureau as they need the help, but it gives us the opportunity also to be able to support the community and have them fill out the application and how we can support them through that process. So thank you so much, Anna, for your input. Thank you to Civis and January advisors. But what that looks like for us is how we're supporting our community moving forward, where we'll be able to call community members and fill out the census with them. So we want to follow the guidelines as presented by the Census Bureau on how we can move forward. Another big ask, we are reviewing the forms that folks have been responding that we shared initially. So if you haven't gone into them yet, please do so. Yes, we expect everyone here to be able to fill out each location in which you're working in. And so if you work in Southwest, East End, and downtown, then you would fill one form for each area that you're working in. This helps us a lot in terms of how we follow up in our calls to prioritize those places. So if you can please go through that link, open it up, and we'll be able to follow up with you after those are filled out. Because one thing we want to do is organize. So by that, we also mean like, who do you know in your community? Do you have relationship with the pastors? Do you have relationship with the principals? Do you have relationships with healthcare providers? All this is going to help us in how we organize and we collaborate together. This way we can focus all our efforts in one specific area a week. And each organization or each individual can say, you know what, I'm going to call X amount of people and help them fill it out myself. Or I'm going to call all the educators I know in this area, and then I'm going to get them to commit to help other people so they can fill out the application. So this really is going to be dependent on how much input and efforts you can make, and we want to help you track the individual methods of doing that. From our calls, we've actually spoke to a couple of organizations before, as we planned all this out and before we did this training. One of the things that we learned is that there's actually groups who have already started helping people fill out the application over the phone. And they've averaged about 3 applications filled out per hour. Now, this doesn't mean that they only took 3 phone calls. This means that through the couple of calls they took, they managed to talk to somebody that they knew. And then through talking to them, they were able to fill out, help them fill out the application. And they averaged about 3 applications an hour, which really makes a huge opportunity for us and how we're supporting the people, which actually is kind of exciting. If we think about how, when we first talked about the census, one thing that consistently came up is like, can we help people fill out the application? Well, now we can. So we got what we were asking for all along, and we're able to make sure that people can actually fill out the application. This way, we're not just getting people to commit to do it, we're actually following through and helping them fill it out. So a few documents that we shared earlier today. The first one, as you see the image right here, was the Yes to Census Regional Coordination Forms. So like I said, go in there, please click on the links that, click on the areas in which you're working on and fill out the forms. These are also being shared in our comment section if you can't find them. The second thing I wanted to cover was our form that we're doing for phone banking. So this is also in our way of supporting even organizations who are outside of our county or who might not get any resources. This is a guideline that we want to put forward, and we will be also adding this in our chat portion so you can see it yourselves. So for this, we want to follow the guidelines that came from the Census Bureau on how we work with the organizations. How organizations can actually call the community members and help them fill out the application. So based on the guidelines, we've developed this this form. This will be updated if there are changes in how we move forward with the Census Bureau and how our responses work. This will be continued to be updated, but for the most part, the responses are very similar. So the first thing we want to do is for folks to familiarize themselves with the census questionnaire. So you can just go to familiarize yourself by going through the questionnaire on your own, or by going through the Census Bureau, and you can actually see what are the latest timelines due to COVID. So this links will take you specifically to what the new timelines look like, and as the Bureau updates it, you'll be able to see them here. Now, all this information will also be on our website. I might say that a couple of times because if you want more and more updated information, please come to our website. So as you go through this process, it will give you sources, it will give you where you can find more COVID information from our website, information about Title 13, and then also as we develop the history of the census for your context before you make the call. Now, it has an introduction script of how you want to follow up with people. Introduce yourself, talk about your organization. Because we're all going through COVID, we want to bring it up, but we don't want to focus all our conversations on that, which is why we want people to have resources available for COVID so we can give those responses. And if people want to go through the process of filling out the application with you, follow the basic steps here. One of the things we want to encourage people here to do also is to check out our Facebook page. We actually practice filling out the census in English. We're on a practice website, as well as in Spanish, which Ana Redondo helped us out, where we went step by step on filling out those questions. So if you want to see what that looks like, please check them out. They're about 50-some minutes long, but that's because we were playing around most of the time and really getting into the weeds of things. So it was a more relaxed setting, but it can be really helpful. Then after you ask the questions and really fill it out, you can go through the process of asking the caller for some information, and then going through the step-by-step process of filling out the application. One thing we want people to remember, just as it is in the beginning, we are not members or employees. I am not an employee of the Census Bureau. This is actually a key ingredient to how we reach out to the community, because we want to make sure that we state that both in the beginning and at the end. But towards the end, once the information is completed, who here answered their census? Thumbs up. Who here already filled out census? Yes, a lot of thumbs up I see. I see Ratatouille too in the background. Awesome. So the reason I bring that up is because at the end, you will see that it says it's a confirmation number. So this confirmation number, we want to make sure we send it to the applicant that we help fill out the application with. So that means that they keep it and that it's not in your phone or on your devices. So please use this as a resource to support you in your efforts in making these phone banking supporting people happen. You can go to our HoustonInAction.org/community response website for further information, and you'll be able to get all this information you need. The last thing I'll bring up again is that to please, I know we only have a limited time available. Please make sure to fill out the census forms that we put together, because we will be following up with people this week. Our first coordination call with Southwest will happen next week, and then we'll be able to move forward.
Thank you, Oscar. I wanted to also highlight that the link that was available for the checklist and the script has now been updated. I think that we were having trouble sharing it with folks, and now you're able to see it. It's 12:27. I think that it is very important for us that you're involved in these efforts. We know that there's so much going on, and we really appreciate all the time and the energy that you've put into this Census 2020 campaign. I want to highlight that it's going to be really important for you all to lead this coordination. We are not the trusted messengers of the community. You all are, and so we really rely on your leadership and relationships to get the word out, to make sure that folks are informed, that they know how to complete the form, that they know how this will have an impact for the 10 years to come. So with that said, we urge you again to fill out the coordination form, and based on the regions that you have efforts in. And next Tuesday on May 5th, Oscar is going to lead us into a training on how to do text banking. And then on Wednesday, May 6th, as some of you know, we have our monthly community and health subcommittee meeting, where we're hoping to discuss in detail the overall plan in the different regions and the resources that we will have by then. So we are asking you to complete this form as soon as possible. If there's any leader in your community that needs to have this form, that needs to be part of this efforts, please feel free to share with them. And if there is there a link to the census presentation given by Ana Redondo? Hi, AJ. We will share it in Basecamp, and then I'll make sure also to send it via email to everyone that participated as well. And Ana, if you're okay with it, I will put it also in PDF version on Basecamp so folks can also see it.
Here's an updated. So I've made some changes since that one. So I'll send you the updated as well as in Spanish, and some FAQs in English and Spanish that talk a little bit more about the jobs.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our partners, Civis and January Advisors, as well as to Crescent organization that couldn't be with us today. And of course, for you all, thank you so much for all your work. And we hope to continue to talk with you in the next weeks. Thank you so much.
Yes, and this PowerPoint and a follow-up email will be getting to everybody, so we will have access to this pretty soon. But thank you for your time. We look forward to getting a complete count as much as we can through COVID, and we appreciate every last one of you. Know that you can reach out to Mario at houstonaction.org, Ana at houstonaction.org, or myself at Oscar at houstonaction.org. So we thank everybody for your time and hope you have a wonderful Tuesday.